All right,
So
start now.
I'll get Deus Fortier in just a moment. He's going to be talking about plant medicine as allies for self mastery. But first, there's just a couple quick announcements. Firstly, just so you guys are aware with the layout, once Deus gives his talk, there's going to be a portion towards the end for asking questions, our Q&A portion, so you can ask your questions at that point. And there's going to be potentially a couple points that Deus might ask some open questions as well. So feel free to you can raise your hand in the Zoom. After this, we're going to have our breakout sessions. So we'll have a little break, and then in our breakout sessions, we break into small groups of about six or so. And this is to help facilitate more intimate conversations and a chance for us to kind of get to know each other and talk about the themes discussed or anything to do with psychedelics or just get to know people and everything. It's a lot of fun. I really encourage you guys to stick around for this part. But if you are planning on leaving after this, make sure you do sign out so that we can just have all the people that remain and put them into the same size groups. As well, I want to mention that we do have a Discord. So we have a Discord channel. This is where we do all our community organizing, and we have a lot of other extra events. We do like hikes, we go places. There's a lot of things that happen that are outside of the meetup or these just monthly meetups. So I really encourage you guys to come and join us in that conversation and really get to know the community. If you're interested in joining, just shoot me a message on meetup.com. If you find me as the organizer, you can send me a message over there, and I'll be happy to get you into the group there. As well, I just want to mention, we're going to have in 2 weeks, we've got something special planned. We're going to have a film screening for a documentary called Psychedelia. And we're actually got the film director, Pat Murphy. So he's going to be on with us, and he's going to have a Q&A portion. So we're going to do the screening. It's a 1-hour documentary. And then after, it's going to be followed by a screen where you actually get to talk to the director and ask him questions and everything. It's really cool. We're going to have the event. I'm going to launch it tonight. So just make sure you get your notifications on meetup.com so you can get the details over there. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I look forward to having all of you guys join us for this. So this is going to be in 2 weeks on the 6th of February. And lastly, I want to say, so today we're going to have Amanda. She's going to be, she's done a big job in terms of helping us out and stepping up to be our moderator for today. And she's going to go over just a couple of sort of the guidelines and rules on how to ask questions and all that stuff. So I'm going to hand it over to Amanda, and thank you so much for helping us out with this, Amanda.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thank you very much to everyone who's already here. Just so you know, I'm Mandy in the list of people, because I'm going by that name here. So if you need to message me directly, look for Mandy. I'm one of the co-hosts at the top for me, but I may be somewhere else in your list, but do feel free to reach out to message me. Basically, we would request that everybody stay muted during the talk, just to keep the background noise to a minimum for Deus and for anyone who's asking questions. We are, as you know, recording. So if you have any issues with that, you can turn your video off. You can also change your name. You can hover over your your image and click the little dots and change your name if you feel concerned about that. For privacy, we can't guarantee it, of course, but we'll do our best. There is no quick and easy Zoom lessons, but they're available online. And of course, you're welcome to ask me through the chat, but I think most of you have probably been pretty experienced with this. As it stands at the moment, Deus will have his talk, and then there'll be a Q&A at the end with some flexibility in between. We'll just kind of go with the flow and take our cues from him and then if he asks you to speak up, please raise your hand. If you hover over your panel, it may be in different instructions on your iPhones. You can find reactions, and under reactions, you can raise your hand. And then one by one, we will unmute you so you can ask the question. I'll do my best to keep it in the order of items asked. You can also send messages with questions through the chat. So you can, again, send the message. I would prefer that you send them directly to me during the meeting. I guess we don't want them sent to everyone in the meeting. It will get too distracting. And then we'll ask Deus one by one. If you don't want to speak up yourself, that's an option, but of course we encourage people to actually ask the questions themselves. If you want it to be anonymous, please inform me of that. So if you really want to keep your anonymity, you can send me a question, but be very clear in the text that you don't want your name used or anything. Otherwise, again, really encourage everyone to be active in having your video on and raising your hand and speaking so we can get to know you. There will be an opportunity at the end of all of this to have a breakout room where you can stay, and there will be talks as well, which aren't recorded. So last of all, if you have any issues with your connectivity, there is some dial-in options. I can send you info if you want to know, but basically it's down under your audio button. There is an option to actually switch to phone audio if you're on the computer and you're finding you have internet issues while connecting. And then on to a little more practical things. These things are not free. And so if you are in a place in life where you can make a donation to Christoph, his email is in the Meetup, and it helps cover the costs of Meetup, Zoom, those sorts of things in this situation. So although it's online, there are costs to running these meetings. And I think the key thing with something like that is that if you can't afford it, it's understandable. But if you're in a place where you can extend it, it will help with all the activities we want to do and have more of these wonderful speakers spend their time with us and for us to get to know each other. So I'm going to hand back to Christoph. I think I got covered pretty much everything, and I'm really looking forward to hearing the questions and, of course, more about our speaker.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Amanda, for going through that and for stepping up and doing this for us. So much appreciated. With that, we'll introduce Deus Fortier, and he's going to be giving a talk on the topic of plant medicines as allies on the path to self-mastery. So Deus brings with us his knowledge and experience from his background as a plant medicine facilitator and self-mastery coach. Some of the topics he will explore include trauma and how to use it and access its points of transformation, misconceptions around healing, and how to approach it in a more enlightened way. As well, we will learn about integration and its significance and how to approach plant medicines as allies on the path to personal and collective evolution. A little bit about Deus. He's a plant medicine facilitator, accelerated evolution guide, Numa Breathwork Facilitator, transformative artist, and a self-mastery coach. He has over a decade of experience in the study and practice of self-mastery and modern mysticism. He seamlessly weaves his wisdom teachings from around the world with a practical approach to living in our modern world. So again, thank you so much for coming here and giving us this talk. Deus, it's so exciting to have you here, and I'm really looking forward to all the topics that we'll cover in this. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to see all of you. Seeing some familiar faces. Hi, you guys. Some people who are here on this call have actually come and sat in some of the journeys that myself and my partner Aga facilitate. So it's nice to see all of you. Man, after listening to the title and all the topics that we're going to be covering, I bit off more than I can chew, I think. 40 minutes is not long enough to go over any of those individual components, but we're going to do our best. But one of the things that I wanted to share right out of the gate is everything that I'm going to be sharing with you is from my own personal perspective. So by no means is any of it 100% true. I'm mostly interested in seeding new thoughts, new ways of perceiving or thinking about working with plant medicine and self-mastery as a whole. We're in a really powerful time in our world right now. There's a revolution that's happening on many, many different levels, and the psychedelic revolution is one of them. There's a lot of tremendous support for psychedelics as a psychotherapeutic offering, the above ground organizations that are doing a lot of studies on the beneficial application of working with plant medicines like MAPS and Johns Hopkins and the Hakomi Institute. And especially here in Vancouver and BC, there's a lot of public support for exploring psychedelics as a healing modality, which is a huge breakthrough for all of us as humans, because these plant medicines are not new to humans or to our world. They've been used by shamanic and indigenous cultures for hundreds and thousands of years. And only now are we kind of breaking the Western stigma around working with these plant allies and really embracing them as a tool. as guides, as teachers, for coming into deeper contact with who and what we are as humans and how to live in a more integrated and fulfilling way as individuals. And then that ripples out through the collective. And if there was ever a time to start embracing that relationship, it's right now, where so many people are struggling with depression and loneliness and anxiety and fear, and so many things are coming up with the global situation that we find ourselves in. So I have some notes that I kind of wanted to touch on as we go through this talk, but I'm not rigidly attached to it. And so first, I think I'll just ask all of you, and maybe you can type your responses into the chat box just to kind of give me some direction to kick things off. What does self-mastery mean to you? What does that phrase mean to you? What comes up for you when you think about self-mastery? Just let me know in the chat box. Because it's a broad topic. I have a masterclass for men that's an 8-week program where there's daily videos and action steps and weekly coaching calls. And that really just sets the foundation for my approach to self-mastery. It's a huge topic that basically covers every aspect of what it means to be human. No idea. That's great. Ain't that the truth? Many things, but one is the ability to be present with our triggers and have compassion for what's alive in us. That's beautiful. Thanks, Deanna. A set of practices and increase in one's confidence in life day to day. Being more active rather than reactive. That's a big one. Being able to choose one's mindset. I'd like to be able to dial into serenity, optimism, and contentment at will. That's a good one. We're going to touch on that one for sure. Personal power, presence, awareness. Great. Those are beautiful. Okay, that'll kick things off for us. So those are really big things. Being able to choose your state of consciousness at will, to be able to develop greater ease and clarity and power and confidence in your life across the board. That's a huge thing, because that applies to every situation, every circumstance, every relationship. Every situation that you find yourself in is an opportunity to learn and grow into greater self-mastery. And that's really what it is about, developing greater awareness, skill, and capacity to navigate life as a whole, and to work with the innate intelligence that is working through life for your benefit, to recognize that and start learning how to work with it to accelerate your evolution. And this is one of the things that I've come into contact with working with plant medicines. And for those of you who have sat in a journey, you have a sense of this, where the medicines themselves are teaching us how to be human, how to become more aware of the intelligent forces that are operating within us and around us, and how to align ourselves with those instead of finding ourselves constantly pulling ourselves into pre-established patterns and tendencies that are born from painful, unprocessed experiences. So there's a lot of different approaches to take when you're endeavoring towards self-mastery, and there is no right or wrong path. So bringing this back to psychedelics for a second, there are 2 main different avenues that people are approaching psychedelics from. There's the above ground practitioners in Western society, which have much more of a psychotherapeutic approach. There's a lot of rigorous studies that are being done right now in how to use psychedelics to overcome and to treat very specific conditions. And then there's below ground practitioners who are kind of operating outside of Western medicine. And this is the more shamanic or the neo-shamanic approach to working with these plant medicines. And both approaches have benefits and pitfalls, which is one of the reasons why open, transparent investigation and conversations like this are so important, because we're in a process right now of bridging the gap between those 2 worlds, this shamanic realm, which is really embracing the spirit behind the medicine, learning how to tap into things like intuition and magic, energy work, the innate intelligence of these living beings that we are communing with when we ingest them. And then the psychotherapeutic approach, which is rigorous, duplicatable application, best practices and protocols, data collection, condition-specific treatment, oversight, peer support, accountability. But there are also some risks involved in both the above ground and the below ground world. So yeah, I'm going to ask you another question and type your answers into the chat box here for this. What do you think some of the dangers, some of the risks, or some of the pitfalls are for the above ground psychotherapeutic approach to working with medicines? Maybe some of you have actually participated in a journey with a psychotherapist or in a study. What are some of the dangers or the risks or the pitfalls of that kind of approach? I'd be curious to hear from you guys. In more psychotherapeutic clinical environments. Prohibitively expensive. Yes, not for everyone. They're currently, I can't remember what group this is, but they're cultivating and working with synthetic psilocybin. And I believe the last time I heard it was something around $7,000 per dose for working with that. The people who need it cannot access it or do not even know the resources are there. Yeah, they're not being actively promoted or advertised right now. It leaves out the spiritual aspect. Yeah, this is one of the downsides of the clinical approach. It's very clinical. I think that we need to start somewhere, so it will take time. Accessibility and cost, but just for now, lack of spirituality. Yeah, and part of my heart quivers at that. It's one of my fears actually about institutionalizing working with these plant medicines, is that it tends to remove the spiritual component of working with these medicines, which is such a huge factor for people who have these life transformative, ecstatic, euphoric, spiritual experience. There's another one in there that I wanted to read. Facilitators who don't have their own plant medicine experience. Yeah, isn't that weird? And we have psychotherapists who are holding space for psychedelic journeys who have never actually taken medicine themselves. I've met a few of them. Spiritual crises such as Kundalini syndrome. Yeah, great answers. You guys pretty much covered it all. Great. And then we also have the below ground practitioners, people who are operating without any kind of oversight, which gives them a lot of freedom, but that also has its own danger and its own risk as well. So same question. What do you think some of the risks or the dangers or the pitfalls are for underground plant medicine journeys? More shamanic or neo-shamanic approaches. Criminal liability. Yeah, it's a risk. It's a huge risk to offer this medicine to people, even if you are extremely well qualified and experienced. Unscrupulous practitioners. Yeah, very, very little oversight. No peer review. Very little mentorship. It's hard to find. Lack of appropriate guidance. Shady shamans. Yeah, there's a lot of abuse that can happen. My partner, she's got a lot of stories. She lived down in Peru for a couple of years and was working at an ayahuasca center there and was directly exposed to a lot of sexual abuse. Not her personally, but she was present in ceremonies where it was occurring. Danger of death. Yeah, it's a wild card. You might get lucky. You might stumble across physical or emotional risk. Yeah, to some degree, that's always there, but it tends to be heightened in unregulated spaces. No accountability if they abuse clients, no legal recourse, no standardized training. Brilliant. 100% agree. That pretty much covers it. Those are the risks. So the benefits of being in that above ground space, that clinical space, is it's very controlled. They got this down to a science. This is what they're doing. They're formulating and standardizing best practices and protocols. So they're primarily concerned with creating safe, replicable benefits to this medicine. There's oversight, there's peer support, there's accountability there, which is extremely important. But they have those rigid protocols. They can't work with groups. There's very little emphasis on spirituality. There's a lot of restrictions on the practitioners, a lot of lines they're not allowed to cross in the relational sphere of working with their client. And there's very little room for things like medicine songs or energy work or tapping into those more invisible aspects of working in these spaces. There's also a political and a corporate landscape that needs to be navigated. And myself and my partner, we're in contact with some people who are involved in these above ground arenas. And one of their biggest grievances is that it takes so long to make any kind of progress in that sphere. And one other interesting thing that I wanted to mention is people tend to, there's a risk of this intellectual authoritarian complex of knowing more than the client, even if they've never sat with plant medicines before. But then you have the below ground groups. They have freedom of facilitation. They can explore lots of intuitive, spontaneous, impulsive methods of working very deeply with another person on many, many different levels. They can work with groups. They can bring in live medicine music, which is healing in itself. There's an intuitive, dynamic structure and flow to those journeys. And there's a relationship-oriented approach with each other, but also with the medicine, recognizing and acknowledging the living relationship that you have with those spirits. But like what you were saying, there's very little oversight. There's very little accountability. There's no way to regulate the preparation, the facilitation, or the integration of those approaches. So why I'm bringing all of this up is because we are currently bridging those worlds, learning from each other, learning from the above ground therapeutic application, which is so incredibly important to be able to understand things like contraindications. What are the risks? How can we approach this in an intelligent, safe way with the recognition that Westerners have a whole bunch of different issues that Indigenous cultures might not be bringing to the table. They're living in a community environment. The plant medicines that they're working with is integrated in how they live day to day. They're connected with the natural world around them here in the Western world. People are living a completely different life, isolated, a lot of medications, a lot of different challenges that they're going through. So we need to learn how to absorb and apply the benefits of both of these approaches, and through that come to understand what we are actually accomplishing and working with these plant medicines, what self-mastery actually is. So one of the things I wanted to talk about to kind of set groundwork is trauma. There's a lot of talk of trauma these days, which is great. It's really starting to enter into the collective conversation, but there's a lot of misperceptions of what trauma is. That word is getting thrown around a lot and is getting misused. So I wanted to clarify that trauma, all of us have trauma. This is really important to understand. Trauma is not the thing that has happened to us. Trauma is the unprocessed feelings that we carry forward from those experiences. You give two different people the exact same experience. One person might come out feeling really empowered or inspired or enlivened. You might come out with a lesson and use that to change and transform, and another person might collapse. Come out with a lot of fear and anxiety. Whatever it is that's unprocessed in the system, it locks itself in and it starts creating contraction and disease. So I want to break down a very simplified form of how trauma forms in our system. So this is especially true when we're very, very young, but this can occur at any time in our life. When we are faced with some sort of dangerous scenario, and this doesn't need to be physical threat, this can be neglect from a parent. This can be, an absent father or an absent mother. This can be verbal abuse. This can be vicariously living through their child and pushing them to succeed So the child comes to believe that their inherent value as a living being is dependent on their ability to perform. That puts a lot of pressure on a child. This can form itself in many, many different ways. We face some kind of threat to our life or self-worth or our value, and our system goes into a mobilization response, which is also known as fight or flight. This is a sympathetic nervous system response. We go into a heightened mobilized response where we need to fight off the threat or escape. And then so often, especially when we're children, when there is no escape and when we can't fight off the threat, like when it's coming from a parent or an authority figure, then we go into what's called the freeze response. This is a collapse in the nervous system. It has a sedating effect on the whole system. It numbs you to feeling that pain because there's no escape. And then from there, from that place of shutdown, we start cultivating coping mechanisms. So we learn how to compensate. We start becoming people pleasers, or we stop voicing our truth, or we start exaggerating our cuteness to get love. We develop these coping strategies as children. And then this starts to solidify and form our personality. This is written from one of my teachers and mentors. He was one of the keynote speakers at one of the Spirit Plant Medicine conferences, actually. His name is Bruce Sanguin, and he wrote a beautiful book that I highly recommend to all of you. It's called Dismantled. Very, very beautiful book for if you want to understand trauma and psychedelics in a much deeper level. He has this phrase called the trauma signature. I'm just going to read a little portion of this. The trauma signature, which is your constitution that has formed on top of trauma, it's composed of core unconscious beliefs, which he calls cubs, that got laid down in response to unbearable failures of love. These failures might be emotional neglect, withholding, rejection, physical or sexual abuse, or verbal abuse. If we had a mother who was feeding off of us energetically to get the love she didn't get as a child, this constitutes a failure of love as well. If we did not enjoy a secure attachment with our mother for whatever reason, this is a failure of love. And failures of love for infants, toddlers, and children are always traumatic. The earlier the failure, the deeper the impact on our capacity to give and receive love as adults and experience life without anxiety. A failure of love is always traumatic. To a child, that's a life or death situation. And that's how the nervous system responds. So we enter in this world with this pure, innocent essence, this innate wholeness. And then we start receiving feedback regarding which feelings and behaviors bring love and which feelings and behaviors bring pain. We then develop those core unconscious beliefs of I'm not enough, I'm bad, I'm lovable, whatever it is. And then we begin to alter ourselves, filter ourselves in order to compensate. And then this becomes our persona, our ego, our identity. And in creating that false persona, we've actually distanced ourselves from who and what we really are, our authenticity. We start to filter how we feel and how we express it in order to gain acceptance in the world. And we do that, we create a schism in our psyche, a fracture in our psyche, where we are not living from our place of truth internally. We are fabricating a persona that's palatable. And all of that is being sourced from a place of unbearable pain inside of us, that I'm not good enough, or I'm not lovable, that core unconscious belief. And so as we start retracing our steps back into our core, really facing things like our anxiety, our depression, our insecurity, our addictions, we start digging our way through the coping mechanisms, and we start coming into contact with things that feel unbearable, overwhelming discomfort. Because that's why it was stored there. That's why it was pushed away in the first place, because it was so hard to be with, that our system intelligently designed an entire defense structure around it so that we didn't need to feel that pain anymore. So when we start working with plant medicines, maybe I should clarify this right out of the gate just to let you guys know which medicines I'm speaking about specifically, because all the medicines have very different effects on the brain, on the psyche. They all have different effects. But my belief and experience is that they're working towards the same goal. So I'm speaking specifically towards mushrooms right now. And then I also work with 5-MeO-DMT and the organic version of that, which is Bufo. And then in the non-psychedelic spaces, I'm also speaking about breathwork for those of you who are interested. But specifically about mushrooms. Mushrooms does this really interesting thing where it temporarily deactivates the default mode network. For those of you who have your video on right now, maybe just give me a show of hands. Who has heard of the default mode network before? Great, almost all of you. Perfect. For those of you who I can't see, who might not know, the default mode network is basically like a mini operating system in your brain that is responsible for filtering reality and kind of generating your non-intentional thought patterns. So it's the habitual way that you're operating in the world is kind of governed by the default mode network. And one of the major things to note here is that one of the functions of the default mode network is it filters out reality so that the things that you are aware of are in alignment with your current beliefs and values. So a great example of this is if anyone has bought a new car at any point in time, how many of you have started seeing that car everywhere you go, where previously you had no awareness of it at all? This is a great example of the default mode network. You buy a car and boom, your brain knows, okay, this is something to pay attention to. And it starts popping up in your awareness. It's not like that car wasn't around before you bought your vehicle, but you're seeing it now. Okay, so keep this in mind because our brain is doing this all the time. It's bringing into our awareness things that we have past associations with or things that we have deemed to be important. So when you take a plant medicine, specifically mushrooms, but the others to varying degrees as well, you're deactivating the default mode network, the normal way that you're filtering reality, and you're creating synergistic connections and communications between the entire brain. What does this do? This does a whole bunch of different things, but the main thing I wanted to mention is it makes unconscious material, aspects of yourself and reality that are normally being filtered out of your awareness, they're completely unconscious. Those now enter into your conscious experience in real time. You get direct access to the suppressed, repressed emotions and sensations, the thought patterns, and it also heightens your senses. So you start experiencing reality that has always existed within you and around you, but you were not previously witnessing or seeing. It's incredibly powerful. And it's also one of the risks. This is why preparation is so important, because there's a reason why that veil is there. The ego is not the enemy. The ego has been intelligently constructed to protect you from very challenging feelings, experiences, perceptions. And so when we deactivate that and we get access to this unconscious material, it can be very intense. It can also be very blissful and euphoric. But in that space, you get the opportunity to engage in subconscious reprogramming, creating new models of your identity, of self, of reality that's more closely aligned with truth rather than program. You begin to see reality more clearly as it is rather than through your filters. You begin to resensitize your inner landscape, your emotions, your sensations, your depth of feeling starts getting carved out again. You start sawing those frozen places so that you can feel fully again. And in that movement, you start releasing stored emotion, unprocessed emotion. It starts to flow out of you in its original fullness. As we begin releasing those things, we start repairing relationship with ourselves and with each other. This is especially noticeable in group journeys when everybody is there feeling their feelings together in a vulnerable, authentic way. That is so healing. We lived in a fucked up world. Pardon my language, but we live extremely isolated, fabricated lives. I mean, how many genuine, authentic connections, real contact do you have as you move through your day-to-day life with random people that you come into contact with? How often does that happen for you? Myself and my partner, Aga, we often joke because our ceremony space is in our basement. We have a designated healing space down there. We're kind of joking at the end of our journeys after everybody's been blasted open and is feeling this connection and this love, how weird it is that we need to allocate, 6 hours on a Saturday where we go into somebody's basement and we're all afraid so that we can feel our feelings around other people again. We start tapping into that and realizing that, oh, okay, we can actually trust each other. And then leading into the self-mastery aspect. This is how we start coming into contact with direct revelation. This is a knowing that is born from within yourself. Wisdom, insight, transformation being birthed from inside of you. It's not coming from an external source, a teacher, a guru. It's not coming from somebody telling you who you should be, what you should do, what the truth is. It is being born from inside of you, from your own direct experience, and that is what transforms you. This is what we have access to when we start working with these plant medicines in an intelligent way, in a conscious way. But what do we do with that? What do we do with a massive plant medicine experience that's really challenging to make sense of? Because you're going into a really disoriented place. You're temporarily becoming dysregulated. You're turning off all the filtration systems that are responsible for keeping you functional. You're temporarily turning those off and you're going crazy for a period of time. And sometimes it can be hard to make sense of that. So what do you do with it? This leads us into how important integration is. And to me, integration is the entire point. And this is the essence of self-mastery. And it's really not that complicated. And it's universally applicable. If there's anything that you take away from this talk, this is it. What is integration? I can explain to you my understanding. So you go into an experience. This can be plant medicine. This can be a breakup. This can be landing a new job. This can be anything. You go into an experience. You go through it fully. You come out the other end of that experience, whatever it was. Then you deliberately go through a process of harvesting the realization that you've had from that experience. What am I more conscious of now following that experience? What am I more aware of following that experience? What have I learned? What is the takeaway from that experience? You deliberately engage in that form of inquiry. What have I realized from this experience? And you identify what that thing is. This is harvesting the realization. After you have that realization, you ask yourself this question. Knowing what I know now, using this realization, what is one specific thing that I will do to live that more fully? And then you do it. So that your realization becomes an actualization. You are embodying the lesson. You are living it, and it becomes you, so that you get the direct experience of inhabiting and embodying that message. That process, harvesting the realization, transforming it into an actualization so that it's lived. That process is integration. That's what it means. And if you apply that, you will start attaining greater and greater levels of self-mastery in your life. Because let's take a step back again. The insight is being generated from within you, from your own direct experience. And then you are coming up with an actionable to live that more fully. And then when you do it, you begin embodying it. It's a self-generating evolutionary process where you're working with the innate intelligence of your own inner experience. If you start doing this regularly, your life will completely transform. And this is how we work with plant medicines, because they're incredible teachers. You invite them inside of you, and they're working with you from the inside out, helping you to feel, helping you to release, helping you to heal, helping you to grow, helping you to connect. You start working with them. Okay, great. After that, what am I more aware of? Figure it out. I will offer some clarity on the action step here, because this is really important, and it's something that people really, really struggle with. It's very important that your action step is specific as you can make it. So to give you an example, if you're coming out of an experience and the realization is, I just need to love people more. That's awesome. And how are you going to do that? How specifically are you going to love people more? You want to find something that you can literally schedule into your calendar. I'm going to call my mom at 4 o'clock on Thursday and tell her that I love her. Once a week, even getting more specific, once a week on Saturdays, I'm going to go outside and do a random act of kindness for someone. You want to be as specific as possible. And one of the reasons why this is so important is because it's kept in this general kind of like vague space. It'll evaporate in the presence of your pre-existing patterns. They're powerful, they're strong. Your programs will just come back in and start running you if you don't deliberately implement something new. So you want to give the mind something to track, and you want to give yourself some kind of actionable that you can literally check off a box, so that you know without a doubt, I did that thing. I am living that lesson more fully. So as we start doing this, going through these experiences that open us up, we find that triggers very, very intense emotional reactions. They start to dissolve. They start to loosen. Their grip over us starts to let go a little bit. The inner conflict that we're feeling of being disconnected, it's no longer projected externally on our relationships. Our emotional capacity, our ability to feel, to empathize, that starts to expand. And as a result of that, we gain the ability to cultivate wisdom through our own direct experience. That is, to me, what self-mastery is. The ability to cultivate wisdom through your own direct experience. Your model of reality becomes more truthful, less biased. And then you start inhabiting your values, your virtues as a practice. which then ripples out into every area of your life. It'll completely transform not only you, but all of the relationships that you carry, the way that you function and operate in your business, in your friendships, in your relationship, in your self-care. And that will transform other people, and that will transform the world. As far as I know, that's actually the only way to transform the world, is to start embodying your values and virtues. So, a few final points that I just wanted to note here. Plant medicines are not magic pills. They're not panaceas. They're not going to magically resolve whatever issues that you're facing in your life. They're teachers. They're here to help you, to guide you, to support you in that process of coming back into connection with your fully integrated, liberated, innocent, joyful self. And they show you how to do that. They're not going to do it for you. They're going to show you how from the inside out. And to be truthful, they're not even necessary. Plant medicines are not necessary for this process. They're simply allies on the path. They know the way and they can show us. This path of healing is the same for all of us, even though the situations and circumstances that we're facing are completely unique to each one of us. The path, the process is the same, regardless of the tools that you choose to use. You might be deeply invested in yogic meditation, and that might work just as well as plant medicine. Whatever your spiritual practice is, if you give yourself to it fully and you endeavor to cultivate that wisdom by integrating your experiences, living, embodying your values and your virtues, you become the change that you wish to see in the world, as Gandhi would say. That's the path. That's how we do it. That's how we change this world. All right, so I think we're pretty much at time here. So thank you everyone for being here. I think we'll open it up for Q&A. If anybody had any questions about anything that I covered. I'm a little nervous about this because I just kind of shotgun blasted you with a lot of different things, but we'll see what comes up if anybody has any questions about anything.
Thanks, Amanda. Deus, I just have one question for you. One of the last things that you said was that plant medicines are not magic pills. They're teachers. They show you how to, and then I didn't hear the word that you said. They show you how to what?
What do you think?
I don't know. I missed it.
Have you been in a plant medicine journey?
Yes.
What did the plant medicine show you how to?
They didn't show me how to do anything. They just revealed to me things that had happened to me in my past that I was completely unaware of.
Great. So it helped generate insight. I think if I was to summarize that, I would say they teach us how to be human. They teach us who and what we are. They teach us about reality. But one of the interesting things is something completely unique happens for each person in every single ceremony. So to say, oh yeah, plant medicines do this, it's really hard if you're looking for something specific. But for you in that moment, it was teaching you how to generate insight, how to come to terms with what had happened to you. For me, the overarching view of it is they teach us who and what we are and how to come to terms with that. They reconnect us with the parts of ourselves that we've buried away. And they open us up to reality as it is, rather than how we have been filtering it.
I have a more practical question so that I could put a link in. When you were speaking about the book Dismantled, it was by Reverend Bruce Sanguin.
Bruce Sanguin, yeah.
Okay, so I will put a link into the chat for anyone who's interested.
Yeah, highly recommend him. He's a psychotherapist who lives on Vancouver Island right now. I see him. I was seeing him regularly for about a year, and now it's whenever I want a session. He's somebody I highly recommend. I trust.
We've had him as a guest.
Oh yeah, you have. Great.
Yeah, about probably a year and a half ago.
Yeah, he's phenomenal.
Sorry, too many windows. Now we have a couple more hands up, I think. Where are we gone? So let's start with Wayne.
First off, I'd like to say what a wonderful presentation. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You mentioned a book on trauma near the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
The name of it.
Yeah, that was the one that Mandy was just asking about. It's called
Oh, sorry.
Dismantled. She just wrote it in the chat box there.
Oh, okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's a really good one. He's got a really great, profound, but very simple model for understanding how trauma forms and how that influences our lives, and then how you can work with psychedelics to start dismantling it. It's a really beautiful book.
And again, thank you for your presentation.
You're very welcome. This is my first time doing one of these talks over Zoom. It's not my preferred format. Most of the time I'm doing like a workshop in person. It's a lot more
You're
fun.
doing very well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
It's certainly challenging because you feel like you have a wall of nothing sometimes, but people are listening intently.
I'm looking at like a list of names.
So we have Christoph, who would also like to ask a question.
Perfect. Thanks, Amanda. And yeah, thank you, Dave. That was really incredible and insightful. I think that was actually one of the best definitions of integration as well that I've ever heard. Just the language you use to describe that is very insightful. My question actually is a little bit around integration. Like, do you find, like, are there any common patterns of behavior or anything that tends to create or like tends to prevent people from properly integrating? Like, is there some sort of commonality that can cause people to either fail to or to just want to avoid? Like, if something super traumatic comes up, that they almost like don't want to face that. Is there any, in your experience, anything around that you find?
Good question. So I should clarify, there's actually two aspects of integration as far as I'm concerned. The first one is that kind of sequence that I was talking about, and that's more active, that requires your participation. Your participation is required to implement a new action step. And if I was to say, if there's one thing that kind of inhibits a person from integrating an experience, it would be the inability to implement an action step, a new way of being. That's probably the biggest barrier for a lot of people. But I also wanted to talk about this other component of integration, which actually requires very, very little from you. Like when we're going into these big spaces, as plant medicines often are, and even though I'm talking about, trauma and intensity a lot, I also wanted to note that like really blissful, joyful, ecstatic, expansive experiences are just as common. And oftentimes they come together in a journey. We go on a journey of highs and lows to experience the full spectrum of life. So just know that that's there as well. But in terms of integrating an experience, just as it is when you go through like a really intense workout, oftentimes you actually just need to rest, because the body, the system knows how to come back to a place of homeostasis, of health, of health in and of itself. And so one of the other components of integration, in addition to like finding, identifying, implementing the action step, which is very masculine, is self-care, prioritizing self-care, which basically means taking care of yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, not as homework, not as like this task that you need to do, but because it rejuvenates you genuinely. Taking a bath, taking a nap, resting, eating good food, getting fresh air, going out in nature, doing something that replenishes and rejuvenates you. So if somebody has a really challenging, a really intense experience, this is extremely important, because not only are you filling your tank back up again, replenishing your energy reserves, but you're also nourishing and tending the system, letting the body and the being know that it's safe, that it's loved, that it's cared for, which is just as important as implementing a new way of being as an action step. We got to take really, really good care of ourselves when we start digging into these spaces, because this is something that Bruce Sanguin actually says. The trauma is formed in the presence of a broken relationship, and it's healed in relationship. And the primary relationship is our relationship with ourselves. So that's what I would suggest for someone who has a really challenging experience. That, and reaching out to people that you trust, people that you care about, who can hold your heart in both hands. Really nurturing the relationship with self and being around people who nourish you, support you. That's what I would say. Those things help with integrating a challenging experience. But in terms of the prevention of integration, I'd say that normally happens when a person is not implementing something new following an experience. Even if they have a very, very clear insight, they don't follow through on it. And so nothing actually changes in that.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
That's a good question.
Okay, we have a couple of hands up and then a text message question. So Carly, over to you if you'd like to ask your question.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you. You mentioned Bufo, and I've been really curious about Bufo ceremonies. I'm wondering if you can describe a little bit of the difference between what mushrooms can offer in ceremony compared to Bufo, and if you know if there are Bufo ceremonies in Vancouver.
Yeah, try to explain Bufo. Oh my God. I've yet to find anyone who can do that. But maybe what I will say, it's in a completely different category from other psychedelics. Very rarely is it visual. It's more of a vibratory experience of becoming. I attribute it to connecting to the deepest core essence of your being. And oftentimes what people experience, especially on high doses of Bufo or 5-MeO-DMT, is what we call a non-dual experience, which is why it's so difficult to describe, because you're actually going beyond the territory of the mind's ability to categorize it in any way, shape, or form. People come out of that experience saying things like, I became everything, or it was like infinite. I experienced infinity, or nothingness, or everythingness, totality. Those kinds of languages that describe a completion experience, or some kind of like eternal, timeless, formless space, is oftentimes what people experience. So it's very, very difficult to articulate, and it's impossible to imagine. So you're using the mind. So you basically just have to go into the experience. But one of the things that I'll also say is it does, more than any other medicine that we're aware of, it creates hypercoherence in the brain. So it lights up the entire brain, which is really, really fascinating. And we don't know a whole lot about 5-MeO-DMT and Bufo. It's relatively new in our global landscape. So we're just learning more and more about it as time goes on. But one of the things that's really fascinating about it is when somebody's in a non-dual experience, meaning they're not aware of their body and they're not aware of the physical space that they're in, their body goes into what's called a presentation. And a presentation generally falls under but there's 5 general categories for a presentation. You have the rollers, people who are rolling around the room. You have the screamers, people are making loud noises. You have the spitters, which you know what they do. You have the runners who literally stand up and move around the space, and they're not aware of this at all. And then you have the Buddhas. The Buddhas literally just lay there and they don't move at all. So it can be any combination of those. And how we're interpreting that is the consciousness is no longer localized as an ego construct, and it no longer has to maintain its operating system, its structure, all of its inhibitions. All of those inhibitions are gone instantaneously. And energy is allowed to freely discharge out of the system. So there's shaking and moving, and it's the nervous system resetting. We can see this in somatic-based trauma work, somatic therapeutic processes like somatic experiencing or breathwork. This happens oftentimes in breathwork. So there's definitely discharge and trauma release that's occurring in those spaces. but it doesn't seem to be a function of deliberately moving into and through and reconciling those energies. It seems to be the result of your consciousness actually not really inhabiting any kind of ego structure at all. And so whatever it is that's in your body is allowed to freely move out. And in terms of Bufo here in Vancouver, yes, it is available. Myself and my partner offer Bufo ceremonies, and we're also connected to a few others who are offering Bufo, and also the synthetic version, which is 5-MeO-DMT, the pure molecule. So one way that you can find myself and Aga is on our website, which is thesomaheart.com.
I just posted it for you, no
Okay,
problem.
Great. And then we also know other practitioners, but I don't want to name them on here because I don't have their consent to do that. But I'd be happy to ask them if I can share their contact info as well. But one of the benefits of Bufo and 5-MeO-DMT is it's not actually illegal here in Canada. It is in the States, but it's an unclassified substance here in Canada. So it's, yeah, it's in a legal gray zone, but it's not illegal. So people can actually share that that's a medicine that they're working with if they are bold enough.
Thank you so much. It sounds amazing to me. I'll be reaching out. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, cool.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Deus. And yeah, so I just, again, I had posted your link in there in the chat room for everybody. We have 3 text questions from the chat. So the first one is, what is the best way to integrate a non-dual experience?
I hesitate to offer any kind of general suggestion because my approach, especially when I'm working with a client, is to help them go through that process that we just described to identify the best action step for them. You know, so I do have like general suggestions in terms of a feeling-based meditation, like coming into deeper contact with your body. I call this a somatic scan, where you're literally scanning through your body to feel all the sensations in detail. That can be really, really helpful, not only for resensitizing, but also doing it from a witness consciousness place. But also the things that I mentioned before, like prioritizing self-care as a regular practice, as a priority in your life. That's really important. But I would say go through that. Actually, there's a series of questions that you can go through in addition to the ones that I mentioned. Let me just see if I can pull it up and I can share it in the text box. There's a series of questions. This is from one of my teachers, Satyen Raja, who's the founder of Warrior Sage Trainings. And he has a really, really beautiful integration series of questions that are designed to carve out incredible depth around your realization and then to move that towards an action step.
Sorry, were you trying to share something?
Yeah, I'll see if I can track it down. It's in one of my Google Drives, but I'll
Oh,
share
okay.
it in the text box. So that's what I would suggest. Some sort of feeling meditation practice, self-care as a priority, and then deliberately going through the integration process that I was just talking about of harvesting a realization and living it more fully. And if the realization is something really, really profound, like I am one with everything, great. What are you going to do with that? What does that mean to you? Why is that important? Why does that realization benefit you? And how does that benefit other people? What's the best thing about that realization? Really carve out some depth. You know, what does that mean for you as an incarnated being? And then after you harvest that, okay, what are you going to do with it so that it becomes lived? It's just as important with non-dual experiences as it is with any kind of emotional experience or relational insight that you have. Okay, it's going in the chat box. That's from our integration resources folder that we link everybody who sits with us to. So that's the series of questions that really help you carve out a lot of depth to your experience. I would highly suggest that if you're struggling to integrate a non-dual experience.
I think you need to check whether you sent it to everyone.
Oh, whoops.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. I think we have time for them. It's about 20 minutes before I think you said you needed to pop off. But Karen wanted to know what you see as the difference between a BUFO and a 5-MeO experience.
Very difficult to articulate. There's a lot more similarities than there are differences. I'd say I can only speak in general terms because like I was saying earlier, every experience is completely different for every person. Every pipe is completely different. So in general terms, what I've noticed from working with it directly and from facilitating it is that BUFO more commonly catalyzes some sort of physical healing. So Aga actually experienced this. It almost completely got rid of her food sensitivities when she was working with BUFO regularly. And it also tends to give people like very deeply embodied experiences, a lot of like vibratory somatic experiences in the low and the mid doses especially, but also in the high doses. And then 5-MeO DMT feels to me more like a technology. Like it's very, very precise. It's a very reliable technology for launching people into a non-dual experience. So if I was to like generalize, 5-MeO, the pure molecule, feels more masculine. It's very precise. It's very clinical. And BUFO feels more feminine. It's not just 5-MeO DMT. There's a bunch of other tryptamines and alkaloids in BUFO as well. And it's an organic compound. So you never really know even how much 5-MeO DMT is present in each flake. And it tends to be a much fuller, more like robust, more earthy experience, even though it can still bring you to very transcendent spaces. It tends to be it's more like, yeah, organic. It has more of like an organic feel to it. Again, language is really, really tricky when you're trying to describe these two medicines. On a practical level, BUFO is different from 5-MeO in the sense that 5-MeO, you're working with a lot less medicine for the same relative strength. So there's a lot less smoke you need to inhale. It's a lot easier for people who have any kind of lung issues or difficulty inhaling smoke. When you're working with high doses of BUFO, there's quite a lot of smoke that you need to inhale and hold into your lungs, which can be challenging for some people. And there's also more contraindications when you're working with BUFO. You don't want to work with anybody who has cardiovascular or heart conditions or sometimes blood pressure issues. And a lot of those things are not present with the pure molecule.
That answers Karen's question. Sounds pretty intuitive. I have one more anonymous question. So it's what you, Deus, suggest in terms of integrating blissful experiences with plant medicine. So for example, if someone doesn't want to go back to the mundane reality of this world after experiencing a blissful expansion or feels they can't fit into the world anymore, especially if one's life is not satisfactory.
It's a tricky one. Sounds like you're trying to escape. So I will say right out of the gate, there's no way to control the content of medicine journey. At least I have no idea how to do that. My whole approach is getting very, very clear on your intention. Why are you approaching the medicine? Why is that important to you? And that's a seed that you're planting. So as all of you know, probably the most important components of a medicine journey is set and setting. The set being your internal state, how you're approaching that experience, how you're preparing for it physically and mentally and emotionally, your inner state as you're stepping into that experience. That's extremely important. And then also the setting, the environment that you're doing it in, the people that you're doing it with, the facilitators who are guiding the journey. Those are the most influential factors in the content that you're going to be experiencing. But you can't control that. And the intention is not a projection of expectation on what you will experience. Your intention is giving you context for the journey. So if you go in and so my intention is to open more to love, and you go into experience and it's really blissful and euphoric and ecstatic, that's beautiful. That's revealing to you the truth of that quality. If you go into a really, really challenging experience, maybe it's actually removing all of the things that have prevented love from manifesting more fully in your life. Whatever comes up for you, you come out of that experience and you look at it through the lens of your intention. My intention was to learn how to love more. And then that helps you piece together understanding from whatever the experience was. And that intention will continue to blossom over time outside of the experience that you just had. But if you're struggling to be a part of the world, following a very blissful, euphoric, ecstatic experience, I completely understand. I spent almost a decade of my life trying to escape this world. I went to go be a monk when I was 20, and I sold everything that I owned, left my job, left my relationship to try to escape the world. And what I came to discover is that I did not incarnate here for that. You are a timeless, formless, eternal being. That is who and what you are. This human experience is very temporary. And we're going through it for a reason. And when we start working with the experiences in an intelligent way, working with the intelligence of life itself, that truth is revealed. Every experience that we're going through has the potential to catalyze some incredible transformation. And like what we were saying before, so you can embody and live those realizations. It is your own spiritual evolution that is the result of you embracing even the challenging experiences of living. So people who are, light workers, they're bridge builders. One of the reasons why, for myself, and why it's so challenging to be here on this planet is to be present with the incredible amounts of suffering, and challenge, and superficiality, and disconnection, and to an open heart. That's really, really hard to be with. But if the result of that is you retracting and closing off, that's very different from expanding and reaching out to try to share more, to give more, to love more, to impact, to serve, service to other. If the desire is to retract, to pull back, to isolate, to collapse, that's very self-focused. So I guess my suggestion there would be, see what happens if you redirect your attention to how you can give to others, how you can serve to others, serve others. And then when you're going into a medicine space, get very clear on your intention. And then surrender to whatever it is that shows up, because it's happening for you for a very specific reason, for a blessing that may be revealed to you over time if you embrace it. Yeah, be very careful about this desire to escape the world. You're only here for a very short period of time, and being a human is a tremendous gift. It's a huge spiritual opportunity, the likes of which we are almost completely unaware of most of the time. It's a very, very sought after experience to have as a spiritual being, to incarnate in this place and have the human experience, and to capitalize on the incredible spiritual catalysts that come along with being embodied, especially during a challenging time. Those challenges, they can catalyze transformation very, very rapidly if you start embracing them.
Okay, we have a question in the chat room from Mark G. Did you want to ask it yourself, or I guess I'll read it for you? He is asking about if you have any informational resources on Bufo, particularly anything pertaining to its legal status under Canadian law.
No, I don't. I'm sure you can look that up though.
I have a feeling he's something to do with, his name is as Green Economy Law, so I think hopefully maybe he's someone who could be a resource. I don't know.
Yeah, if you can find like the actual some resources for that, I'd love to receive them. But in terms of, Bufo resources, not for the legality, but one of the interesting books about learning more about it is called Tryptamine Palace I think it's by James Orrock. Just double check that. Yeah, James Orrock, Tryptamine Palace. That's one of the first kind of significant books about Bufo when it first started entering into the public sphere. But yeah, I don't have any resources off the top of my head for its legal status.
I know there's a lot of resources out there starting to appear, of course, in these different realms to do with both the legals and all of the questions brought to light today. So I'm sure as time goes by, oh, there we go. He's also, Mark has provided psychedeliclaw.ca. There you go, there's a link. Wonderful. So I think we have time. Well, we don't really have time for another question unless there's something burning in anyone's mind. I think it would be hand off to Christoph in a moment, but unless Deus, if you would like to wrap up with any thoughts for yourself before Christoph chimes in, and then we'll take a break and then we'll have a breakout rooms.
Yeah, no final comments, just that it's been a pleasure to share this time with all of you. Thanks so much for your time, for your presence, for coming and participating in this kind of conversation. It's these kinds of communities and gatherings and explorations that are going to help, move this kind of work through our world in ways that we really, really need. And I know for myself, more community is really one of the most important medicines for me in life right now. With so much disconnection and isolation, coming together is good medicine for me. So it's been nice to share this time with all of you. And thanks for having me. And thanks to the team that made this happen. Kenny, Mandy, Christoph, thank you guys for organizing this and for the work that you're doing for the medicines and for the world, for all of us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dace. That was just an absolutely incredibly insightful presentation. And I really honestly hope, like, if people just picked up even just those small little parts of it, it was just so much learning. So thank you for opening up us to all of these different perspectives and ideas. It's unfortunate that we were in a place that we were initially planned to do this in a physical space meetup, and we weren't able to do it. But again, thanks for making it still happen in this format. And we are going to try and get back to physical space meetups, because that's where we really have a level of community engagement that is still something different than just online Zoom meetings. But that being said, we are still going to go ahead with our breakout groups. So we're going to break out into groups of 6. So again, anyone that wants to leave at this point, this is your point to sign off. And then the rest of us, we're going to take a minute break, and then we're going to launch into the breakout groups. And you can stay there as long as you like. And then lastly, I just want to say also thank you to Amanda for taking the time to step up and do this for us. It's been hugely helpful. I definitely can't do this all myself. So thank you for doing this.
My pleasure. I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Yeah, thanks.